Yeah, trying to log into Fibery right now. I just saw this.
What?
Into Fibery.
Oh, the link. Yeah, I haven't tried yet, but it seems relevant.
It does. I'm still thinking Plant UML is doing most of what I do.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. You need an interactive tool, Mechanism. You need to be able to drag around. You need to collaboratively be able to edit it.
No, that's true.
I mean,
that's true.
We've done the live sessions
it's...
where you try to edit it. The default layout algorithm is horrible. It just becomes like this total mess. No, PlantYML wasn't working. I think we tried that enough.
Oh, well, fair enough. Well, let me try Fibery and see how that works. And
and furthermore, what I have in mind is really, as I call it, runtime typed graphing node. So I want to be able to specify one possible node is a statement. The statement can link to, etc. And it seemed what Felix linked to is much more along those lines. And it makes sense that ER diagrams would do that. But yeah, I have to try them out. I guess that's one topic we can talk about, by the way. But once Timothy arrives, I don't know why he's in the background. We could also just try to stabilize our glossary based on the common ground we found the past 2 weeks.
I'm looking at Fibery. It's very project and tasks thing oriented. The fact that you can connect boxes is almost an accident. I wonder if we could use Figma almost.
I also don't know Figma. I haven't done proper exploration yet in this space. I just have like some idea of what we would need.
Yeah, the other tooling we need to discuss is what to do with Zoom.
Yeah, true. That's actually more urgent, I guess.
Slightly, yes. I wish I had taken a Zoom account. I almost did.
Yeah, my work contract where I have Zoom ends at, well, at the end of this month, so that doesn't make sense to set that up.
Yeah. I have my wife's account, but she does need it.
Well, now we know what to ask for funding for. Zoom accounts.
Yeah, I have used Jitsi and the like. A friend of mine has a Jitsi server he's allowed me to use. There is, what's it called? The code, there's one kind of shared infrastructure for open source projects thing that you pay a nominal fee to get into that has, I don't remember if it's Jitsi or Big Blue Button. My experience with those is, yeah, they work, but they're less, the quality is less than Zoom.
And do they provide free hosting, or you need to set up your own server?
You need to set up your own server, yeah, well, but that's what I'm saying.
I don't think any of us has time to do that right now, right?
There's this company who does server. We're small enough that we could go, there's a lot of services that we could go with, such as.
But I mean, can't we just use Google Meet or something? I don't know about recordings and stuff. Maybe that's not
Google
possible.
Meet allows recordings, yes.
How much is a commercial license for Zoom?
$200 a year, US.
Not much, but still.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. I've been here. I'm just making my lunch.
Okay.
But I heard everything you guys said about me.
Do you have opinions on tools like Fibery and the like?
No, I mean.
But maybe before we go into that discussion, I can provide some more background information from what I wrote. So Matilda brings yet again another very opinionated, well-researched model. And it seems to be a constant, right? We've talked with so many people with different projects, and we all seem to have a different model, and we all seem to have many reasons for thinking that's the correct model. And really what we're lacking is a quick way to iterate on those models rather than just building a whole system and getting it out there. So I started to think, what is a common denominator of all of this? And this really, we all need to be able to more quickly iterate and try out models to actually map real world things.
Yep.
And that is a common tool I think we all need. And if it doesn't
Yes.
exist, it's something that we could attract funding for to find, one, to build, or to extend an existing model, or to incorporate a industry partner that is best positioned to build that. And then our role would be to use that to quickly iterate on all of our models and try them out and to find advantages and disadvantages of each, and maybe to converge, like we're trying to do, to a shared common model or different models and see where they interrelate. So it's really taking a step back in a way, but at the same time, I think it is what we are doing, because we are trying to understand each other's models and trying to see what the common denominator is. The only problem is, yeah, the tooling we've been using so far is highly suboptimal to do that. So that's where that was coming from. It was interesting to hear Bentley say that they had a similar discussion in the OGM meetings. Does any of you attend those?
I do. I'm not sure what he's referring to, however, because actually I think there's many OGM meetings and I don't think I'm attending the same ones as Bentley. So in a way, I don't know what he's talking about, but we're very much having this discussion in the Flotilla subcommittee of the OGM meetings. And we're talking about modeling and how do we share models and yada, yada, yada. But again, even in Flotilla, there's other subcommittees and I don't seem to be in the same ones as Bentley. So there's
Flotilla.
Flotilla.
Fleet of ships or boats.
Yeah,
I don't think that's what you meant.
No, obviously not. I'll give you the URL. Flotilla project.xyz.
But yeah, I mean, if you look at what we're trying to do in the glossary is add examples. All of these examples, they're highly ambiguous because they're purely textual and they're still fully open to, if all of these examples would actually be embedded in an actual shareable model, I think we would be 10 steps further ahead.
That's absolutely true. And in a way, I've been, I'm having my seminar Friday and I almost reported again, but no, I think I'm getting there. I'm mostly working on notation these days, because notation is important to, and for me, it's text as a shared representation rather than graphical, because I'm still a big text person. And, in an outliner mode, we are still able to hide things and selectively view things and stuff like that. So that's what I'm trying to work on.
I think a textual representation definitely is key as well, even if it's just easily to have import and export functionality. The core data structure should be decoupled from how you want to outline or visualize it, or the subset you're viewing at any given time. So that's also some of the requirements I would list for a tool like that would support us in doing this indeed.
It's also, if we're thinking diffing, we need an AST, not just a visual.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But we also need the visual. This, regardless, when you're going to screen share, when we're going to work on the model, that's what Plenty UML fell short tremendously.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because we can be the only one that are struggling with this. And yeah, you have mind maps. I used to use Xmind in the past, I think like many years ago. I quickly looked at that was okay. But I think all of these have, yeah.
Whimsical flowchart. Lucid chart. There's a lot of things.
Lucid charts I use quite. That's also what Carl suggested, I mean, I use lucid charts quite a lot to create UML diagrams, and I mean, no, it's a pain in the ass to create nice UML diagrams. It works, but I'm always like, maybe I should change jobs and create a business out of creating better diagram editing tools. Which is another interesting thing, even though that CDL should be non-profit. If what we agree to do is build diagramming tools, that could easily be for-profit as an enabling tool that could, so I think totally. That there's a lot of different funding opportunities there.
I've always, I believe strongly in open source for the, I'll interrupt stuff, because how else do you get interrupt? Mm-hmm. and maybe some of the logical engines, because it has to be transparent, but visualization and manipulation and UX, I mean, that's common, right? In open source to pay for good UX. Mm.
But yeah, so in an ideal world, there's a tool out there we can find and can start using. But that's a separate topic than what we can talk about today.
Okay.
But just to give an update on where that was coming from. Mathilde is going to write a outline now with some type of project proposal, and then the idea is to see whether we can incorporate more people, including CDL, etc.
Right. I'd really like to have that chat with Mathilde as soon as possible. So because there's so much, maybe I should just contact her. There's so much in common between what she's trying to do and the goals of hyper knowledge in particular.
Yeah, but at the current point, it's more like not to have too many chefs in the kitchen because that ruins the soup, as they say. So it's more to get some quick progress on suggested projects that we think people can share, and then to work on that once that is defined. That's the current plan. But yeah, it's super relevant. And like I said, it's actually super cool that more and more people are reaching out and are doing similar things as CDL. I mean, there's this real, that's another thing we can actually talk about at some point. Maybe we need to do some more community building rather than only meetings. I mean, meetings are essential, obviously, but maybe we should set up some Reddits, some subreddits for CDL where we can have more, like, open this discussion to other people as well.
I understand.
Because, I mean, if there are so many people interested in this space, we really need to start better communicating about it. Like the Medium post that Timothy has written every now and then, etc.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay, do we, I think this is a useful conversation to have. Do we keep that up or do we get into glossary, or what do you feel?
I don't think there's much more to say. I just wanted to give the background. I think that's all I can say now. So I would like to move to the glossary, because right now we're in a bit of a in limbo state where we may or may not agree with some of the stuff on there. So I would like to just stabilize that at a minimum this meeting.
Good.
And I think the two ones that we need to start looking at are standalone claim and fragment, obviously. You might want to direct standalone claim back to
oh yes, I'm trying to remember what the
alignments.
Yes.
And the reason you did that was, did you comment actually? No,
damn it. So I'll need to, okay, let me remember the conversation a bit.
It had to do with the current two proposed definitions, obviously, that gave rise to this, but
oh yeah, the whole question of, one second.
It of course had to do with indexicality.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I think it was about it might have been actually doing with the question of boundedness. For
yes, you're right.
Yeah, it was about, for you, if the boundedness is not perfectly well defined, it's not standalone.
So I think in the past 2 weeks we did establish consensus on what I meant by that, right? But then it's a matter of what language we want to use to express that. because both you, Marc-Antoine, and Timothy, you came to an understanding of what I meant by clearly delineated explicit context, if you will, like the distinction between whether or not the claim should be interpreted by looking outside of the bounds or not.
Yeah, it's actually that's the part that's less clear. The part that we did get the full alignment on is the distinction you're making. In a way, it was between quoted and unquoted, right? And
well, yeah, fragment and non-fragment, I would call it. So maybe we should start with fragments.
Yeah, maybe that's easier.
So for me, a fragment was always quoted, to use the language you use now. That is the definition of a fragment. And that's also something Timothy didn't fully agree on, I think. So I think fragment is the first one. Do we want to stick with calling quoted what you just mentioned now fragment, or do we want to call rename fragment, or should we add more examples to make that clear that fragments as originally intended always rely on interpreting the context within which the fragment object, as you once called it, appears?
Still trying to remember some of the issues. Sorry, I'm obviously I got into a totally different mind space, and it's hard for me to get back into it. But what was the problem? I mean, for me, of course, a fragment is quoted. Like the one difference I remember us having actually is when you said contextual claim was a claim about the fragment and not a claim in a fragment.
Yes.
But I don't know if we disagreed so much on fragment itself.
No, Timothy primarily did. So this is more a question for Timothy, I think.
Yeah, I guess the problem is the language you use there is interpreting. I mean, the fragment to me is just a description of where to find something. It's, to me, a fragment is a reference with boundaries.
And the content itself, maybe,
Okay,
but so far so good.
Okay, let me test that notion of fragment. Is a URL to an image a fragment?
So, you know, that's the sort of thing where it depends on whether or not we are going to have some other entity called reference. Because in that case, you know, I would say that's just a reference to something.
Exactly. So fragment here indeed refers to a subset of content, like bytes, whatever, in a media source.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a subset of text on a web page. It could be a sub-region in a video, etc. Those are the examples.
Yeah, but what I'm the thing that has me a little tentative about this is the wording you used, where, you know, it's like you mixed what happens in a claim with what happens in a fragment. The intent of incorporating its context or not. Like, there's no intent in a fragment of, like, are you talking about its context or not? Because you're not talking about anything. A fragment is just a locator, right, of something within something bigger.
Within a context, within a bigger context. And yes, I think part of the problem was that I think we should probably make it explicit that a fragment indeed refers to the context, hence it also pulls in the context, or
and that's
like a fragment without the context is not a fragment. That's a corollary to that, right? If you just have an image, and yeah, sure, it may be a reference, and you have some, that's an infrastructure concern, how you load that image. If you load it through a URL, so be it. That these are concepts, right? We're not talking about implementation details. An image by itself is an image. It's not a fragment. An image that appears on a website, that's a fragment. If you say, well, that image that appears on that website, that's a big distinction.
Correct, but like, it doesn't mean it pulls in the context. It doesn't mean like anything you do with that fragment requires the user of the fragment to consider the whole context. That's
Well,
it's not.
okay, but that's why that's simply a semantical thing. I'm suggesting to label fragment, yes, it does require pulling in the context because we already have a name if it doesn't require pulling in the context, and that's an image or a piece of text. If the fragment consists of the content, the fragment content, the thing being the subset, as well as a media source, then what you're talking about is just a subset or the content.
Yeah, but when you use the word pulling in, you're implying something there, and I don't know what you're implying.
Well, I'm implying the difference that you recognize is important between a fragment where you would then say, well, both are fragments, but some fragments you need to interpret the context and others you don't. That's the difference.
It
and
has,
I'm just
has
saying,
nothing to do with the fragment. It has nothing to do with the fragment. It has to do with what you're doing with the fragment. That's why I'm saying it's outside the fragment, the whether or not context matters, right?
So what I'm telling you, what is a fragment when the context does not matter? How is that different from just the content? We already have a name for that. That's what I'm saying. That's just the content. It's the bytes. You don't need the media source. So why would you insist on calling that a fragment as well? If the media source,
because you need a name for something that's a locator of content within some other content.
Yeah, but some other content is not relevant. Yeah.
It is because it's helping you find the thing.
No, it's helping the implementation to load the thing. You're confusing implementation details.
Not confusing.
Concepts.
You're implying a use. You're infusing a use in the fragment that then limits its usability in other places and its reusability, and it's
no, I'm saying it's a useful distinction to make, and we agree it's a useful distinction to make. Now we're just discussing.
But I think it's
the
useful to make in the
about
claim
this.
and not in the fragment.
We can talk about fragments.
No, it is important. Okay, so let me try to take it from another angle, because now I'm remembering the whole discussion. There is a level where we have vague locators like URLs and precise locators for a subset of a URL, and that's what a fragment is. In a way, it's a precise locator. But what's important is not the vague and precise. It's precisely the fact that we can have just the retrieve, forget about where we got it from. That's the forgetful content. Or we can retrieve and remember where we got it from, and that's the non-forgetful. This content came from this origin, and that means interpretation of it should take into account the origin. Now, one thing Stephen is saying, and he does certainly have a point, is that how much of the origin should I have to consider, because and that's an intent thing, because everything's intertwined with everything, and ultimately the context is, as I often point out, the whole language. So it would be nice to have another boundary of how much context do you want us to consider when trying to interpret this little bit of content. And that's something we're still negotiating, because I'm willing to leave that more implicit. But
what I'm arguing that when it's either delineated or not. If it's delineated, it's all part of the claim, which I would call a standalone claim. If it's not delineated, it probably means you have something like a fragment where you just point to the subset, but not to the boundary of the content.
Exactly. Delineated or not. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And I'm perfectly on board with that. Now, I think what you're saying, Tim, is that when we bring the context, there is an intent of using the context, and that is a bit baggage. But
that needs a name.
That's kind of the point we're making. It's content with provenance as opposed to content without provenance.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Those
are two synonyms. I would call fragment content with provenance, and I would call the other thing just content without provenance, which can be both added to a claim, but the result is that I would call one a standalone claim and the other one a contextual claim.
And you're absolutely right, Tim, that when we bring the provenance, it's because we have an intent to use it. Does that help in any way clear things up, or? But maybe it's true that the intent to use it is not clear enough in the definition, and maybe
No,
we
definitely isn't.
maybe we should make that more explicit. I'm on board with making that more explicit.
And even renaming it a fragment is too unclear, right? If content with provenance is the preferred name, but it's more about, you also need to see why we wanted to introduce this entity in the first place. And that is because the use case where it was used in was referring to linking to content with provenance.
Yep.
And that's how we came here.
So I don't know if that helps at all, Tim.
I don't know. I have to think about all the different cases of when you want to use a fragment, which is the problem here.
When you try to replace fragment here with your own definition of, because it's cyclical, right? What do you mean when you say all different cases when you would want to use a fragment? Is it the same as what we're talking about, or something different?
I mean, the way I look at it, a fragment is, like I said, it's like a locator, right? And you can make a lot of claims about that thing the fragment is pointing at. And one of the main use cases I see is evidence. Now, if you want to ignore all those use cases and say we're taking this thing that's a locator and we're just going to call it fragment, and when we call it fragment, it means you care about the whole context. Okay, but I see that
I would even, because let's take a step back. You mentioned evidence. I don't really see how evidence comes in the picture here, because I arguably could see evidence being both with or without context, even depending on what you call evidence.
Evidence is using media to support a claim. And there's a whole lot of use cases around there.
So yeah, if you want to add evidence that Trump said something and you link to a media source where Trump says it, I would call it a fragment. If the media source is included. But yes, it's definitely about semantics.
I mean, I guess part of the question is, when you talk about the delineation of the context itself, right?
That it's really, is there a media source or not? That's the distinction. Is there just content, or there's content within a media source?
Yeah, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that distinction. If it's just content versus content within a media source.
That is the essence
we're on
of
the same page there, right?
And
so
what
that
we're
to me is
trying
a
to
fragment.
define with fragment here is content with a media source, which implies the intent indeed, and that we need to make more explicit, that implies that the media source is relevant. Why else would you include the media source? Otherwise, it's just content. If the media source is not relevant, it's just content.
Right. The thing is, I could see a reference. In other words, you didn't specify boundaries.
Well,
you just pointed at
content is well. If you only have content, that is a natural boundary, right? The boundary is the content that you provide. The point is, once you add a link to a media source, now no longer do you have a boundary specified, because the media source is unbounded.
Yeah. All right. I'm okay. I'm okay with that way of looking at it, which is it's content with a media source, right? I'm okay with that. It's content with a media source that includes the boundaries of that media source, right? Where to find it and everything. It's
not the boundaries of the media source. It contains the location to be able to retrieve the content
the full
within the
locator.
Media source. Yeah.
Right. Yes. I'm okay with that.
So do you think we can come up with a better name than fragment that you think you're more comfortable with calling?
No,
that?
I'm fine with fragment as a name. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
So then it's simply a matter of making probably in the definition more explicit that the media source is unbounded and that the intent. Are you okay with including that in here?
What do you mean by the media source is unbounded? You didn't specify the boundaries of the media source. Is that what you mean, or?
Yeah, and I would argue it's even, I mean, once you specify the boundaries of the media source and it's immutable, I would say it's just content again. So it's really the distinction between, yeah, content and content within context.
Yeah, like I would say that one of the things that the one candidate for a media source would be another fragment, right?
Yes, but that would then inherently be a fragment as well. But yes, I mean, if you have a fragment being a subset in a media source, then a subset in a subset of a media source still includes a media source, so it's still a fragment.
Right. Yeah, I'm okay with all of that.
Okay, let's see whether we can make this clear. An identified spatial temporal subset. I'm going to write i.e. is this correct here? Content. Bounded contents, or does it just make it more confusing? I think bounded and unbounded is probably more a laboratory explanation.
Yes.
But content
No, yeah, I
makes
wouldn't
sense
say
now.
IE content. Yeah, remove
Mhm.
IE content. That just adds confusion to me instead of clarifying.
Okay, an identified spatial temporal subset in a digital or physical
Instead of
media
in a, I would say of a.
of a digital. The intent is that whenever the fragment is retrieved, the retrieved content
There
is
you
the
go.
same, i.e. it is immutable.
And comes with the original, the context or the provenance is included.
Yeah, I think I know what you're trying to say, but no, I don't know. I'm just trying to write this up here, but I don't know whether this does more harm than good.
The content is bounded in the sense that there's a clear delineation of what is or isn't part of the content. That's clear. However, a media source is unbounded. Once a reference to a media source is made, the content to be considered when looking at the fragment is unbounded. I find that sentence less clear.
Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say, and if I'm not mistaken, don't erase it yet though. Let's just write another, put a return and let's try have another attempt.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're trying to say is that how much of the media source is of the deemed appropriate for understanding the fragment is not specified and may be specified by another fragment.
This is where I think you're going too far and just inserting more confusion. You're inserting specific use cases where this might come up into the definition that just
no.
makes the reader wonder what's going on there.
It's at the core of the definition. But what I'm arguing for here
And
is
then we're going to go back to disagreeing.
No. If
Like,
the media source is relevant, that's when I argue. So yeah, if there's the intent of the media source being relevant, then I would call it a fragment. If there isn't, I would just call it the thing we don't have a name for.
But if
Steven, I think I even agree
if
with
the
Tim.
fragment, if the fragment is of a specific web page and you locate it that way, but the intent is to discuss if it's part of the whole website, it doesn't change the fragment. The fragment's a fragment. It doesn't matter if you intend to discuss the page it's on or the whole website. I don't know, is this, a Breitbart article and you want to talk about Breitbart, or you want to talk about the quality of that article? Same fragment.
There may be a higher level construct which needs to be defined separately, where we have a fragment with a delineated context, and that's another object. And this is where I agree with him. I agree with you, however, Stephen, that we do need to say that it's unspecified here. And Stephen is right in saying we do need to say it's. My attempt was to explain it by saying what it could be part of, and Tim is right, that's adding confusion. But we do need to say how much of the original source needs to be considered is unspecified. And that it could be as simple as that. I don't know.
I don't understand why that's necessary to say.
Because it's the essential difference between a fragment and just content. That is the distinction.
No, the essential difference is that it comes from a media source. It's within a media source.
Yeah, and if the media source it comes from doesn't matter, I would just call it content.
It does matter, but
I would say it's a difference between a fragment and a delineated fragment.
Okay, let's write what Timothy just wrote. However, the origin of the content is important.
Fine with that.
The origin, well, the provenance is really what it is. Content, i.e. the context, well, the media source is considered important. And then try to tell me, Timothy, why it's considered important, because that's essentially what we wrote before. But maybe you can put it in your own words.
Or for content and for interpretation of the content.
Why is it important?
To interpret the content. I really think that's what it is.
Yeah, that is what it is. If it's not important to interpret the content, you don't need the media source. It's just content. That's the distinction we're trying to make here.
Yeah. So why don't you want to write to interpret the content?
I'm waiting for Timothy because this is something he said and seems to agree with. So I'm asking Timothy, what is it that is important here?
I just feel like you're embedding too many things into this definition that may end up breaking. You may end up saying, oh, it's not a fragment just because
it doesn't have a media source.
No, it has a media source, but for some reason I care about is bounding, or the bounding of what is it, or whatever.
Bounding of what?
Source.
Yeah, but okay, if you care about a specific subset in the media source, isn't that the content of the fragment? Wouldn't you just create a different fragment?
Take the example of what I was saying about, if you're making a claim about Breitbart versus a claim about an article.
Make a claim to make it explicit. Come up with like a claim about Breitbart.
Breitbart is a website that hosts news articles with racist statements or something.
Okay, what is a fragment here?
Inflammatory statement.
What is a fragment?
It's a It is a statement within one of the articles within breakbart. But
No,
you would do
sorry.
it as this article, page, this article, third paragraph, third sentence.
I'm confused. So you stated a claim, but is there a fragment in this claim, or I'm failing to understand what you're trying to say?
No, the claim is the statement represented by this fragment is racist or inflammatory or whatever I'm trying to say. That's the claim, right?
Statement represented by
this fragment.
Okay, so you link to some text on Breitbart News, and you say this statement is
racist. Okay,
racist.
we'll
yes,
use racist to go with. Okay, this statement is racist.
And
right?
the fragment here
and
is
that,
like some text that you highlight on a URL. Okay.
Yeah, and my point is that you should be able to use that to support the claim. Breitbart contains racist statements, or this author writes racist statements, right? It's the same fragment, even though the context that you're considering is different. It's the same fragment.
Wait. One step at a time. So you're arguing that a claim that contains a fragment should be able to support another claim that doesn't contain a fragment. Breitbart News is racist. Yes?
Yes.
Does anything in this definition make that impossible right now if we add what we wrote?
No.
Okay. And what was your second
point? I had to
point?
see what you were going to write. But
so there's no conflict there, right?
There's no conflict there.
I mean, I think you're already anticipating just a potential disagreement on whether or not contextual claims, if we can finally land on fragments, I could define as a claim that contains a fragment, whether or not that can be used as supporting claims. And yes, there may be disagreement, but I mean, the only way to resolve that is if we can finally agree on what a fragment is.
I understand that. All right, write the phrase you want. Write the phrase you wanted to write, and I'll.
I think it's a second. No, Martin had a good one. However, the provenance of the content, i.e., the media source, the media is considered important in order to interpret the fragment. Was this it?
The content, yeah.
The content, yes. Correctly, or no, not correctly, because it can still be
interpret.
Yeah. And it is considered important. Yes, that is the use case we're delineating. So that's definitely better than this.
Yes.
A fragment is thus content in context of a media source, which is distinct from just content. The content is bounded in the sense that there is a clear delineation of what is or isn't part of the content. Yeah, however, the provenance of the content media source is considered important in order to interpret the content. In contrast,
well, there's something else here, that the content is not, the context is not bounded, which is a separate issue.
Sorry, come again?
The fact that the context is not delineated is a separate issue. I don't know if that is what Tim is worried about adding, but
it's implied here.
Yeah.
We can still add it explicitly. So it would be a therefore.
Not therefore. It's, for me, it's not implied for me.
If it's not, I don't think it. I think you're referring to yet another use case. If we're adopting this definition Fragment 1, I think what you're saying is that you can also have a fragment with more structure, that you have.
Yeah, that is a separate use case. What I'm saying is, here is a negative. The boundaries of the context are not necessarily specified or not necessarily precise.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually need just the definition of media source. That would be the correct place to define
Yeah.
it, but we can add it here for now. The boundaries of the media source
may
are
not be delineated, I would say.
Are they ever?
Sometimes, okay, suppose the media source is a web page and the web page is not part of a site. It's just, you know, it's there's no link to anything. There's no backlink in the same domain.
Yeah, but then
Then
the web page gets updated and includes a link. Is it a web page at a particular point in time? Is it a web page? So
yes, I did mean at a particular point in time.
yeah,
Yes.
which is something different. I would call that content. If you're caching a full web page at a particular point in time, I wouldn't call it a fragment anymore, because at that point, the entire content that should be considered.
I think you're saying you wouldn't call it the media source anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. There, yeah, we really do need to define media source. I would be more inclusive with media source. And I would include snapshots in the media source definition. It's
Yeah, and then the question is snapshot of what?
of a mutable resource.
Yeah, but because the media source boundaries are not clearly defined, the answer of what are you snapshotting is not clearly.
That's correct.
We had that discussion. I think that's really, if all you have is a.
Okay, but I mean,
hyperlink,
none of
essentially.
that conversation changes the sentence I proposed. The boundaries of a media source may not be defined. You're saying they're never defined, then I would.
I'm looking for an example where it is defined. And I just, you said, well, a URL. So the media source here.
No,
would
I
be,
didn't say any URL. I
Okay.
said a URL to a standalone page with no outgoing link and no incoming link in the same domain.
Yeah, but
It's-
how does the URL guarantee in any way that the URL doesn't show different content at another moment?
Or
in
even
time?
I would say even a snapshot of such a page. And then I amended to a snapshot of such a
Yes,
page.
and I would call a snapshot of
Like-
the page not a media source indeed. I would call it something different, because at that point it is immutable and it is well delineated. At that
Okay,
point,
fair
it
enough.
could better be phrased as
Okay,
not a
so
fragment
What
of
about
content.
a link to the Wayback Machine, a specific page?
Well, the Wayback
Wayback
Machine can
Machine.
change their implementation, and maybe the Wayback Machine is a comment section. I don't know. We can check.
No, but there's a point. I think there is a way to have a URL to just the content, and it doesn't have the comments. It doesn't have a comment section. Anyway, that's not the point. And I think there is a kind of commitment for constancy of, and then I'll give a CID as an example. But the other thing is we had many examples with, and you had published article with a DOI, right? And I insist on publish, not preprint, because the preprint may still change, but the published, the whole point is it's immutable. Or a
Yes,
book,
okay,
if we're
that's-
precise enough with the edition and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but let's go back, because exactly we agree on this. Nowhere in standalone claim is there a mention of fragments. We don't call it fragments, but we have that here, yes. So all of that is already included in the definition of standalone claim.
So should we extract it
Well,
to make it not claim specific?
I'm arguing there's a distinction between something immutable that you include in a standalone claim, be it a definition, be it an entire snapshot of a page, be it a book, be it whatever, a full image. That's totally different from a fragment, which includes a media source where you cannot control immutability or guarantee even that the locator always returns the same thing. That is a distinction.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying, as I've always been saying, all these definitions, all these considerations about immutability and everything have nothing to do with claimhood and should not have been put in the standalone claim text. They should have been put in the immutable source text or something more abstract. And then if it happens to be a claim, then it's a standalone claim. But that's another consideration. What I'm saying is the fragment, there's nothing in my understanding of the definition of fragment. I mean, I agree, a fragment can be taken from a mutable media source, but it can also be taken from an immutable media source, which is...
Okay. Okay, I see your point. By the way, we have immutable. So I can easily say to define this, what I'm suggesting is that fragments does not link to an immutable media source, or not a well delineated immutable media source.
Why not? I'm saying it may or may not. I'm saying I don't see why we should restrict fragments from being taken from immutable media source. I even think it's the ideal case. If we have a fragment to a mutable media source, I would like to take a snapshot and convert it to a fragment of an immutable media source as soon as possible. Both are fragments.
Okay, but if both are fragments, why would one be, because we're talking about this because of this sentence we wanted to write. Why would one be clearly delineated and the other one wouldn't?
Yeah, that's correct.
No,
It may or may not.
Why would one be well delineated and the other one wouldn't?
Okay, because it's not that one is necessarily well delineated or one wouldn't, but most of your objection, when I said it could be well delineated, I said may or may not, and then I said, and you said, yes, and most of my examples are immutables, and then you started rejecting immutables, so I'm saying no, I'm including immutables because all my examples of well delineated are immutables.
Include immutables, but then why are you arguing that an immutable media source is well delineated?
No, it can be.
No, give me why can an immutable
and I
media
gave the
source be
example.
well
I gave the example of a published article with a DOI.
Okay, then we go back to: do I, when I'm reading that article, should I consider the citations or not?
The citations of the article by other sources, no. No, yeah, that's saying no background.
That's a distinction.
Oh, no. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, that way, yes. And here, good point. No, now I understand. Now I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Sorry,
the other voice is confusing. Is it yours or Tim's, the other voice?
I thought it was you, but I guess Timothy didn't.
It's not.
Guys, that mic's open.
Yeah, so do you see? One
is
just the paper and not the citations. That would be a standalone claim, including the full paper. The other one links.
I understand what you're saying. But I'm still okay. And is there a case where it's well delineated in that case? Now, suppose the article had no citation.
Yeah,
suppose it's a novel.
Then it can be, I gave the same example, then it can be the same book by the same author published after or before. Should that be considered or not? Because
I'm referring to a specific edition of a book by an author with no quotes.
Doesn't matter. The question is, are you pointing to only that book? In which case it could be a standalone claim and you're clearly delineating only that book, or are you pointing to that book and should I also consider all other publications by the same author? That is the distinction. And it's
I understand what you're saying.
Semantically the same as linking to a website or linking to a snapshot of a website.
And what you're saying is maybe that's another structure where we say how much we want to consider.
Exactly, and that's honestly the point of a standalone claim. The point of a standalone claim is to clearly delineate how much you want to consider. That is the whole purpose.
Okay. Okay. So let's rephrase. Okay. I'll let it be. The boundaries of the media source are understood to not be delineated.
We need to clarify that, but that is the.
Okay.
Explicitly specified.
Are not explicitly delineated.
Yeah, explicitly is the point, right?
Yeah. No E. Yeah.
In the sense that.
No, I think in the sense that is.
Yeah, we need to clarify what that means, not explicitly delineated. In the sense that it is. That there is no. I don't know.
Explicitly specified?
Yeah, that is the same. Delineated, specified. Delineated is what specification does here, right?
It is not clear what related content lies outside the boundary.
That the extent of the media source is not clear, actually.
I mean, why do you need to include this text? It's like you're trying to
Define the
off.
difference between a fragment and content. That is what I'm doing.
No,
if the media source is well delineated.
Stephen, this is about the, it's not about the difference between fragment and content. This is the next thing about in context. This is about the difference between fragment and well delineated fragment, what you call standalone.
But a well delineated fragment, if it is no longer, it's no longer relevant.
Or a fragment with well delineated context, I should say.
Explicit context. A fragment with well delineated explicit context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's something.
This is the point where, like, I don't believe in having structures for that sort of thing. Yeah,
but that's a separate discussion. I mean, we're trying to have that discussion, but we don't have the words to have the discussion. That's why we started. I know you don't believe that, and you want to be able to mix contextual claims and standalone claims. I'm first trying to make understand what the difference is between standalone claims and contextual claims, which, like the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, all of a sudden you understood that there was a distinction, because when you have a fragment, which to you was either before, it's important to know whether or not that fragment requires understanding context or not.
Actually, yeah, what I understood is your intent for a standalone claim is different from what I was understanding to be the intent of standalone claim, right? Suddenly standalone claim, I thought standalone claim was basically going to end up being what I would want in the canonical debate, and now it's not. Now it's a subset, and I'm not even sure what the intent of this subset is. I guess
it doesn't matter. You can have a discussion and say that you want to support both contextual and standalone claims in a system, but we need to understand that we're talking about 2 different types of claims, and you recognize that.
But see, I don't see the distinction between the 2 different types of claims. That's
you do.
That's right.
You do. Timothy, we
established
you saw a distinction between a claim that has a fragment in it that requires you to interpret the context, and a claim that has the
exact same. To me, that's the same thing as separating claims about politics versus claims about science. It's a distinction that to me is unimportant to the design of the system. And when you say, okay, then we're going to have claims that are about fragments where we specify the boundary of the media in which it's in. To me, that's when you write a claim, you say, I only care about, looking only at this page, like you use words to do it, and you don't need a structure.
I gave you an exact counter example of that where it failed. If you remember, blah, blah, blah is racist. There's a fragment, blah, blah, this image is racist, this image is racist. That one fragment is with context, the other one is without context. Do you remember?
I remember that, but that's different from where...
How is it different?
You're going another level now and saying where the boundary outside of the fragment is also bounded, is going to be a separate structure. And I'm saying we don't need that structure. That's all.
We need to be able to make that structure. I don't know if we need it or not. It's a good question. I find it interesting to consider, and I want to be able to consider it. I am not convinced either way, by the way, but it's certainly worth making the distinction, I think.
But not at this point. I guess, if anything, that will be a further distinction that you can make of different types of fragments, but all of them are fragments according to this definition.
Yeah.
Because even if, well, no, okay, I see your point. Yeah, I'm just looking for a word where the explicit context is not bounded.
For me, frankly, the sentence was fine before, in the sense that I would put a period there. No, the boundaries of media source are not explicitly delineated, period, clear enough.
Yeah, but what I don't think it's clear enough, because what does that mean? It just moves the problem.
Guys, I'm sorry, I gotta go. I have another meeting.
Yep, I'll drag it back to in alignment and whatever. I also removed Felix already because we changed it.
Yeah, I think I think we're in agreement with Fragment. Now our disagreement is, I think you guys are trying to put in extra. You're
We need to
trying to
go
be
over
extra explicit
examples.
about Fragment that doesn't need to be there, and it's creating more discussion around something when we can move on.
Okay,
But
you know, I'm willing to give in on this because the reality is this point will become important. Let's put it in the comments.
I think it's gonna
okay.
reveal itself through examples whether or not we understand each other with the current definition. I think we can do that next time.
I think that's
Okay.
true. Well,
Okay, I gotta go, but yeah.
Okay, but yeah.
I think that's a
See
good route.
See you. Yeah, one quick point. You asked at the beginning of the meeting whether the whole media source is a valid fragment. I would say yes, but that's an edge case that needs to be discussed. When Tim was asking about
I would also
references.
say yes, but I would say, again, media source unfortunately is undefined, but the Zarathustra example, you can have the whole media source as in a fragment, but you can also have that whole media source, that book. I wouldn't call it a media source at that point, but okay, as content. That is a distinction. In one case, the other publications matter. In the other one, it doesn't. But, yeah.
So anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make. Maybe it should be put in the edge cases, and I think that's a good time to wrap. I'm willing to remove that sentence if it's too controversial. Put it in the comments, or I'll put it in the comments. If that's the obstacle to aligning, let's remove it. I'm not willing to.
Identified spatial and important subset. Content in context of media source, which is distinct from just content. Content is bounded in the sense that there's a clear delineation of what is or isn't part of the content. That's what we call explicit context, right?
Yeah.
Or i.e., no. Context is made explicit. Yeah, not really.
No, not really. No. Actually,
we do know it refers to it, right?
Yeah.
Content in context of media source, which is distinct from just content. Content is bounded in the sense that there's a clear delineation of what is or isn't part of the.
Yeah, I removed the in contrast because it's not in contrast. The contrast was about the thing not being defined. It's just the provenance is considered important. That's a separate point.
Yeah, the provenance of the content, i.e. the media source, considered important in order to interpret the content. But what I'm trying to say is, but the media source is unbounded, but it's already up there. So, well, so what to consider to interpret it is unbounded.
I say let's move that sentence after that paragraph, but I was saying let's move it because it will become relevant later.
Which sentence were?
The one that you've highlighted.
This
no. The one you had highlighted earlier. The boundaries of the media source are not explicitly delineated. Could go at the end of the second paragraph. Or even here, actually, this is where, yeah, or before the last sentence. That would be my ideal form, but yeah, Tim is not happy with that sentence, and
I think
I'm ready to postpone this fight. Let's put it this way, because it will become meaningful later. And
but it is defining the distinction that Timothy may be arguing is not a useful distinction, but that the point is that's irrelevant. We need to define it to be able to then talk about it to see whether or not where it may or may not be a useful distinction.
No, I agree with you, but what I'm saying is let's see if we have a need for this well-delineated fragment, which I think is an interesting point. Like I could see people having an argument over, oh, but you're only considering this, and if I broaden the scope, then there's more. I can get a different interpretation by broadening the scope. And these conversations happen all the time. That's real.
Yeah, but if you Yeah, okay. So you're saying it's a standalone claim, but it includes the media source, but you're telling the interpreter not to consider the media source in essence, right? You're only telling the interpreter to consider the well-delineated part of the media source.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if we look at real life arguments about this, right? People point to a media source and then they have a scope in mind, but it's not that they're telling people don't consider the rest. It's that this is what I've looked at, which is
it's the context. Like I was talking about this, what this person said here, there. Yeah.
And you're kind of saying, I've looked so far. I'm not saying don't look outside. I'm saying I've looked so far. And then somebody says, you know, I've also looked at this other relevant thing. And that changes the interpretation. So it's a broadening of the context, but it's not about, I don't think when you delineate, you're ever saying, just look at that. You're saying you are with the fragment.
No, of course. You always need it, but it's about the shared assumptions. It's the explicit shared context. That's what it's about.
It is. It's about saying this
because
is...
if definitions are included in the explicit shared context, if you then argue against a claim that has explicit shared definitions in the explicit shared context, you're making irrelevant arguments. You're arguing against definitions that are not included in the explicitly shared context. Right. That's the point of a standalone claim, where you can include definitions in the standalone claim. If you point to a media source and the definition is implied because you just so happen to know the author in another book might refer to a definition that he always uses, that's not included in the explicitly shared media source. So you can then a discussion about whether or not that author intended that definition here, or maybe only introduced the definition at a later point in time, becomes relevant. So it's the distinction between these concepts has all to do with the relevance of arguments, really.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's also why I, first of all, want to make the distinction, because it clearly has a clear impact on discussion. Second, why I don't think intermingling contextual and standalone claims, contextual being claims with fragments in them, it has concerns we need to consider if we are going to start doing that. For me, a base layer is a layer of only standalone claims linked to one another. And then there's another layer where contextual claims can also be linked to standalone claims to make the link from context to context-free discussions.
Yeah, I disagree. I disagree on that last part, but, I understand the distinction.
That's what we can discuss once we understand the distinction.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm good with this definition, so I'm gonna retract Timothy as well for now.
Yeah, before we leave, I want to spend 2 seconds to draw your attention to a recent thread by Mike Caulfield. I know I often bring up Caulfield. This is, let me just find it. And he's basically making the point, and I don't know how you'll feel about that. I think it's more something that, whoops. Okay. Oh God. And I have troubles running into Twitter. Won't be long. I bookmark it? No, that would have been useful.
And then we have to go over an example. Okay.
Sorry, you know what? I'll put it in the
Slack.
Yeah, I'll put it in the Slack. It's simple.
Perfect.
So give me 2 seconds. But basically, there's been a study. Okay, he's working on tools for disinformation and looking at disinformation, and they're always about adding context. Like the tool he's promoting is always about finding more context and finding.
I think in this we agree with this, but what he calls finding more context is what I think we call making claims more specific.
Oh, interesting.
I think there's a corollary there. It is
no.
If standalone claims more general to more specific, that relation which we have agree on, what that does is it makes the explicitly shared context bigger. if you make a claim more specific, it makes an explicitly shared context bigger. That is what making, for me at least.
Yeah, that's most definitely not what he's saying.
No. I'm saying I think that's the, when I hear that out of context, I need to read it, of course. I think that's the corollary to what we are doing with making standalone claims more specific.
Okay, let me actually read part of
like
the
adding a
thread.
definition from a specific field. Isn't that including more context?
No, he's very much advocating looking at, is this from a reputable source? And he says that's, and not just reputation, it's more than reputation. It's giving what is the provenance of the claim as a way
different.
to fact check.
That is different.
And he's very much arguing against the whole analysis, saying, you know, analysis takes a lot of time. People won't do it because it takes time they don't have. They won't do it systematically. And
there's no tooling support for it, I would argue.
There's no,
so
yes, that's
people
true.
Cannot do it.
That's true. And people, and it gets people into a cynical, doubt everything, all points of view can be argued for mindset, as opposed to this, okay, is this from somebody who has relevant things to say about this?
In that
which he says he can
my
do in
intuition
30
is I disagree with that view, because that's exactly what you want. You don't want to link the credibility of a claim to one. I mean, arguments from authorities. Sometimes...
No, I know. He's, but it's not exactly authority. This is where it's interesting. It's more, does it have a credible origin? And this, it's more about, can you find?
It's your use case of linking contextual claims to standalone claims, and I agree with that. If you have a standalone claim in what I would call a base layer, it's super useful to see which sources use that standalone claim and agree with it furthermore. Like if
which is yet again something more, something different. He's saying, how did that belief come about? Like, in a way, it's the epistemic source of this. Why would people have formed
in
that
context or out of context?
In context.
Exactly, because I mean, we're doing the same with standalone claims, except that we don't assume any one specific context to have that belief. We're just arguing all the information that's out there to either believe or not believe in that standalone claim. But having the same discussion in context is something different. That's why context matters, and there's a big distinction between contextual claims and standalone claims.
There is. And I think it's important to be able to put them together, and that's why there's
definitely a need for linking the two. There's no disagreement there. The question is how to do it, when to do it, and what that means, and etc.
Yes, where I agree with you is that doing it as if they were equivalent is an absolute...
It's not going to fly,
Yeah, there I'm with you totally.
Perfect.
Okay, have a good one.
Excellent. I'm happy with the new definition. Yes. So I'll write it in the meeting notes that other people can have a look at it as well.
Okay.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.